Hello everyone, my name is A-Crown, and today's story takes place in Marvel Universe 19, a world and a YouTube channel hosted and created by Cosplay Dude 637, also featuring stories by myself, Ty Tiger, and Mark the Red Cornish Ranger. The story I bring to you today features Frank Castle, aka The Punisher, aka War Machine. Without further ado, I present Frank Castle, Machine of War. Frank Castle walks into the lobby of Avengers Tower and then works his way towards the elevator. After getting in, he hears the voice of Jarvis, Tony Stark's AI assistant, come over the PA system saying,
Mr. Castle, I've been expecting. Please, head up to the top floor.
"Alright," Frank replies as he hits the button to go towards the top floor of Avengers Tower. In a few moments, the elevator car arrives and Frank steps out into Tony Stark's penthouse. Frank is greeted by Jarvis, who says,
Mr. Castle, I'm happy to inform you that the upgrades to your suit that you requested are complete.
Frank then walks through the room and says, "Thanks, Jarvis. And you've taken off all the guns, right?"
Of course, sir. I've done as you requested. This armor is labeled the Close Combat Threat Battlesuit. Is completed melee weapon focused now?
Jarvis says as Frank's sleek new armor comes out of a nearby wall. Jarvis then creates a hologram of the armor. Then the hands come into focus and the AI says,
In replace of the 2 wrist guns, set 2 wrist-mounted blades and a hidden ejectable spike dagger.
He then begins to highlight the rest of the suit, telling Frank about the faster improvements and all the other various changes, including non-lethal anti-personnel devices. "Thanks, Jarvis. I really do appreciate this," Frank says as he admires the suit. Jarvis then asks,
Mr. Castle, I was wondering if you'd be able to help me with a problem.
Frank turns, intrigued, and answers, "What can I help you with?" Jarvis then activates a nearby screen and says,
Some old star tech designed by Tony's father has gone missing from a SHIELD convoy.
"And why do you need my help with that? Doesn't Stark have a protege for that sort of thing?" Frank asks.
Indeed he does, sir, but Miss Villians is currently occupied, and of course Mr. Stark is off-world dealing with the problem in Asgard.
Frank responds, Yeah, I know. But since you helped me with my armor, it's the least I can do. Where was this convoy last spotted?" A holographic map appears and a bright transponder signal appears as Jarvis says,
Just outside the New York City limits. I shall have all the information sent to your suit's operating system.
"Thanks, Jarvis. Don't worry about this. I'll have it taken care of in no time," Frank says as he approaches his new suit.
No thank you, Frank. Mr. Stark will be very pleased.
Jarvis replies. As Frank removes the helmet and looks intently at it, he says, "Too bad I ain't doing it for him." A short while later, Frank flies through the skies of New York, following the coordinates given to him by Jarvis. After getting accustomed to the new controls of the suit, he soon arrives and lands nearby. He sees quite a few SHIELD agents on scene. As he approaches the area, he's stopped by a younger one who says, "Sorry, authorized access only." Frank stares him down and the young agent begins to quiver and Frank replies, "I'm here on behalf of Tony Stark and his Jarvis, so you better let me pass, son." The agent nervously does and Frank examines the scene. His helmet quickly identifies bullet holes as being from standard issue SHIELD weapons. But he does not need his helmet to recognize a nearby knife on the ground. Frank walks over and picks it up, saying to himself, "This is one of Taskmaster's. What would he want with old Stark tech?" Frank puts it into one of the storage units of his suit and continues walking around. In the nearby bushes, he finds another discarded weapon. This one he doesn't recognize. He picks it up, and his OS identifies it as Hammer Tech. Frank then says to himself, "Now Hammer I could believe having something to do with this. He's been after Stark's tech for years." He tucks it into another storage unit and launches into the air, flying back towards New York City. A few moments later, he hears screaming. He tracks the sound of it using his visor and sees a woman screaming for help. "Help! That man has my son!" Frank sees a car driving away from her. He flies down towards it and drops right onto the ground in front of it. The car stops suddenly right before hitting him. The man gets out and, waving his gun, starts yelling, "Get out of here! I just want the car! Leave me alone!" He shoots at Frank, but the bullets just bounce off. Frank walks up and hits the man with one punch, sending him flying and screaming through the air. Frank then talks to the small child in the backseat, saying, "Everything's gonna be okay, kid." The woman then runs up and hurriedly gets her son out of the car, crying tears of happiness as she looks at Frank. Says, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." "No problem, ma'am. You and your son have a nice day," Frank says as he launches back into the air and flies towards Hammer Industries. As Frank comes within sight of the building, he pulls a tactical layout up on his HUD. He makes note of the guards and everyone else in the facility before planning out his attack. First, he disables the alarm and camera systems through remote hacking thanks to his operating systems. He then focuses his attention on the guards patrolling the outside of the building. He makes quick work of them before moving on towards the guards inside. He looks inside and sees 2 guards at a security desk and one posted at each elevator door. He launches 2 flashbangs out of his wrist gauntlets into the room. They go off and disorient the guards. Then Frank moves into the room and takes them out with quick, accurate strikes. He then enters the nearby elevator and hacks in, giving him full control of it. He then goes up to the top floor of the building where the office is located. When he reaches the top floor, it stops and the door opens, and Frank is met by what seems like a small army of security guards. They all draw their weapons and one of them yells, "Stop right there!" Frank replies, "You can either let me pass, or I can make you let me pass." One of the guards fires his weapon, and the bullet just bounces off of Frank's armor. And Frank says, "Fine. Option B it is." Frank walks towards them as more guards begin shooting. As the bullets just deflect off, Frank fires a smoke bomb, clouding the hallway with thick, dark smoke. Frank takes a couple guards out with punches and kicks. He then fires a tranq dart, which causes the guard it hits to pass out almost instantaneously. He launches a net at another guard, pinning him to the wall. One guard swings his club at Frank, who catches and snaps it in half. Frank looks at the guard, who then lays his weapon down before laying himself on the ground. Frank then walks towards the office door after saying, "Good choice." He then kicks the door off of its hinges and sees Justin Hammer and his daughter, Justina Hammer, standing behind Taskmaster. Frank and Taskmaster stare each other down, and he says, "Why did you take the Stark Tech?" Justin yells out, "I don't know what you're talking about. Have you lost your mind? I'm calling the police." "Go ahead. I'll have my information before they even leave the station," Frank replies. Taskmaster then steps towards Frank with his sword drawn and says, "You can try." Frank extends his wrist blades, and Taskmaster swings his sword at Frank's, who blocks it. Frank then swings at Taskmaster, who parries it and sweep kicks at Frank. He jumps to attack and does a mid-air booster enhanced kick. Taskmaster activates his foldable shield and blocks the kick before taking another swing with his sword. His armor deflects it, and Frank then spins, swinging his blade at the villain. Taskmaster parries it before lunging at Frank. Frank then disarms Taskmaster mid-attack and judo throws him across the room. As Frank walks closely to the Hammers, Justina stops him and says, Okay, I did it. Don't listen to her. She doesn't know what she's talking about," Justin says as he turns towards his daughter. He then says, "Be quiet, Justina." "What? Why? Do you want him to kill you?" "Because if you shut up, he won't find it," Justin whispers as he signals Taskmaster with a hand motion to stay back. "It's already gone," she replies. "What do you mean it's gone?" he asks. You're sick, Dad, and they promised to help me with the cure. Frank turns towards her and asks, Who? The Hand, she answers. Justin is then enraged and yells, Oh, you gave my hammer suit to the ninjas. That was my one way to finally one-up Tony Stark, and my one chance to be the richest weapons maker of all time, and you gave it to the ninjas. I was trying to save your life, you arrogant bastard, she yells back. Damn my life, I was so close to being pompous-ass Tony Stark, and you had to go ruin it, he says as they're knocking some of the stuff off of his desk. Frank approaches Justina and asks, Where did they go? I don't know. They came to me when they heard about Taskmaster stealing Stark Tech, she says, visibly in fear of the Punisher. Frank turns his attention to Justin and says, Does it have tracking? Justin backs up and says, Yeah, on that computer there. He points towards the computer, which is the only thing remaining on his desk. Frank walks over and turns it on, telling his OS, Initiate file copy and download. Justin then looks over at Taskmaster and directs him towards Frank. Taskmaster nods and then tries to sneak attack Frank, who realizes this and easily counters and launches the villain out the nearby window. You just committed murder. You're going to jail, Mr. So-called hero, Justin says. Frank smashes the computer and walks away, saying, He'll live. He's been through worse. Frank then leaps out of the same window and flies off into the air. As he's flying, he contacts Jarvis and says, Hey, Jarvis, I got a lead on your missing tech.
That is good news, Mr. Castle. Can I expect it will be returned soon?
Not exactly. It's in possession of the Hand.
Oh dear. Do you require assistance? I could try and contact some of the heroes that are located near you.
Jarvis says. Frank responds, No. They're all busy, I'm sure, and I don't want to bring them into this. The Hand are too dangerous. Jarvis tries to say,
But sir...
Frank stops him midway, saying, Jarvis, I'll deal with this. Just leave them out of it. Frank disconnects the call and increases his speed, flying towards the source of the signal. As he's flying through the air, his visor scans the structure where the signal is emanating from. He detects a massive amount of hostile entities. He lands nearby and decides to approach on foot. As he gets closer, he sees how massive the structure really is. He takes a nearby guard out and pulls him into the bush. He searches the man and finds a walkie-talkie. He then uses his visors and his OS to sync up with the walkie-talkie's frequencies. He then works his way towards the building, listening to their comms for any sign that they know he's coming. He works his way inside, taking out a few guards along the way. He enters to find nothing but a big, darkened room. He scans the area and finds nothing, so he activates night vision mode on his HUD. But then all the lights go on, and the sudden flash of light disorients him. As he tries to regain his senses, he is swarmed by multiple hand ninjas. They hold him down by his hands and feet and drag him out of this room into a shrine-like room, where Frank sees a man kneeling. Frank retracts his faceplate and says, To whom do I owe the pleasure? Is that you, Red? Or is it Nobu this time? No, Frank. What's the matter? You don't recognize me? The man says as he stands up, revealing a costume Frank is familiar with. Taken a bit off guard, Frank says, Bullseye. Ain't seen you in a while. Thought you were dead. Bullseye walks towards him and kneels down close to Frank and says, Nah, that other Bullseye. Don't know where he is. Don't really care. All I care about is making your life hell. He didn't scare me, and neither do you. Frank says as he spits in Bullseye's face. Bullseye laughs and wipes it away and says, Good, Frankie. Glad to know you're still as tough as ever, and that this suit hasn't made you soft. Oh, you don't know what this suit has made me, Frank replies. Bullseye laughs and kicks Frank directly in the face. And after Frank passes out, he's dragged out of the room. An undisclosed amount of time later, Frank begins to wake up, still in his armor. Frank then realizes he is hung by his wrists, gauntlets, suspended from part of the ceiling. He wiggles, but it only manages to move him slightly. Then Bullseye and some hand ninjas walk in. Bullseye looks over towards Frank and says, Frank, old buddy, how are things hanging? Frank just scowls at him, and Bullseye then says, sorry about the bad joke. If I'm going to be a supervillain, I gotta play the part, right? Frank just continues scowling, and Bullseye approaches him and says, oh, wait. We're not supposed to have emotional responses to things, right? Gotta be the big bad Punisher. Or is it War Machine? Doesn't really matter. All that matters is now that we've got the Stark Tech and Hammer Tech that fool Justinus gave us so easily. All it took was an eensy-weensy little crack about saving her poor father. Oh, family, it's always an easy weakness, isn't it, Frank? Bullseye then gets in Frank's face and says, just like you, with your poor family. Frank tries to lunge at Bullseye, who just laughs. Keep my family out of this, you son of a bitch. Frank screams at Bullseye. Is that where we are? At one point we were friends, Frankie, Bullseye says. You lie. I don't know you, Frank replies. Bullseye then removes his mask, and Frank is visibly stunned and says, Thomas? Bingo! He says as he walks around and gets all the ninjas' attention. He continues on saying, a long time ago, I was a young, dumb kid on the streets, and Frankie here took me in out of the kindness of his heart and was teaching me the way of punishment, as he calls it. But you hurt one person just a little too much. It's too much for him, Frank responds. You were torturing an innocent civilian. That was not what I was teaching you. Oh, nobody's innocent, Frankie, my boy. The guy was associating with criminals. Isn't that the whole shtick? Taking out people who are trouble? Bullseye says, no, we're supposed to punish the thugs who were hurting people. That man did nothing wrong, Frank says. Thomas puts his mask back on and says, well, whether or not I was deserving of it, you cast me out like trash. I idolized you, but now I don't want to be you. I want to destroy you and everything you care about. And that hammer suit and your precious gun suit, war machine armor, whatever you call it, are going to help me do it. Frank then begins laughing hysterically. Bullseye looks confused at Frank and says, what's so funny, Castle? Frank stops laughing and says, You brought up what I taught you and still haven't remembered one of the most important things I taught you. Always be aware of your surroundings. Bullseye says, this room is the most secure room in the building you can find, and you are all alone. Frank laughs again. You even named your own mistake and don't even know it. Bullseye, getting angry, yells, what's so goddamn funny, Frank? Frank's face goes stoic and he says, this isn't a gun suit. He quickly ejects a blade from his wrist and it slices through the chain almost like a hot knife through butter. Frank's faceplate goes back into position as the ninjas charge. Frank fires nets at some of them. Bullseye then takes out his walkie and yells into it, all hand members to the warehouse, kill Frank Castle. Ninjas flood into the warehouse and Frank extends both blades from his wrist gauntlets and begins trading blows with the ninjas. As Frank fights back the ninjas, Jarvis chimes in on Frank's helmet saying,
Mr. Castle, I know you said you required no backup, but I took the liberty of calling in some anyway. He should be arriving any minute.
"Well, Jarvis, at this point, I'll take it," Frank replies as he fights and begins to be overwhelmed. Well, the robot said you needed help. Never thought I'd see the day when the Punisher was taken down by a few ninjas, the man says as he draws a sword from his back. One of the ninjas yells, "That's Blade! Get him!" Some of them charge Blade, but he easily deflects their attacks with his sword and hits them with quick strikes. Frank fights his way towards Blade and stands back to back with him. And he says, "Guess I should be glad to see you." "That you should. Almost didn't answer when Jarvis called," Blade replies. "Well, thanks for doing that. You think you can hold these guys off for a while while I go after their leader?" Frank asks. Blade smiles and answers, "Of course. These guys are 10 times easier than fighting vampires. Go get him." Frank nods and takes off after Bullseye. Frank fights his way through a group of hand ninjas as Bullseye winks and points his finger at him like a gun. Frank follows up the stairs and easily takes out the ninjas along the way. He soon catches up to Bullseye on the roof. Frank yells, "End of the line, Tommy!" Tommy turns around and replies, "You gonna try and kill me, Frankie boy?" Frank answers, "Only if you make me." Tommy laughs and says, "So you have gotten soft underneath that shell. Years ago, you wouldn't have hesitated." Frank puts up his faceplate and looks Tommy in the eyes, saying, "Tommy, you don't have to do this." "Yeah, I do. Tonight, I punish the Punisher." Tommy pulls a knife and throws it at Frank. Frank's faceplate goes back down into position, stopping the attack, which would have hit him right between his eyes. Tommy then pulls out a pistol and fires shots at Frank, who narrowly avoids them. Frank then fires a net at Tommy, who pulls out a sword and slices through it easily. Tommy then charges and swings his sword at Frank, who uses his boosters to avoid it and draw his wrist swords, which he swings at Tommy, who parries it and strikes Frank, but the sword just glides across Frank's armor. Tommy then strikes Frank's faceplate, damaging the eye slits. Frank pushes him back and then removes the damaged plate from his helmet. Tommy then pulls another knife out and throws it, but Frank avoids the attack with his boosters again. Then they both charge each other, clashing swords, and Tommy tells Frank, "I'm not gonna stop until you and your legacy are dead." Frank replies, "I know," before extending the spike from his wrist gauntlet, hitting Tommy in his shoulder. Tommy pulls away and clutches at his bleeding shoulder. "Good job, Frank. I never thought you'd get a hit in," Tommy says while chuckling. "Tommy, I'm sorry," Frank says as he approaches Bullseye. "Too late for that now, Frank," Tommy says as he puts explosive on Frank's suit. Frank quickly removes it and explodes, slightly damaging Frank's rockets. Bullseye then leaps from the roof and lands in a rising helicopter. He then yells, "I'll be back, and next time, I won't miss." The helicopter then flies off as Frank watches, and he says, "I'll be ready, Bullseye." Frank then leaves the roof and soon reunites with Blade. Blade then says, "You get him?" Frank somberly replies, "No, he got away." Blade then says, "That's why the rest of these guys ran off." They shake hands and Frank says, "Thank you for your help. You need anything, just call me and I'll be there." "Funny you mentioned that. I need your help with something," Blade says. "What is it? Help hunting vampires?" Frank asks. They both walk out of the room and Blade says, "We gotta make a deal with the devil."